You're in the breakout room, and we're talking AV. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Today we are going to be going in and talking about the ins and outs of audiovisual. It has been certainly an integral part of meetings and the attendee experience. But these days and the future is certainly bringing a lot more interactivity to our desktop. Certainly today's broadcast is a good example of that, as well as to even our lives and how we deal with our families. So we're going to get into that today and go into a lot of detail. We're going to ask lots of great questions. I have a phenomenal guest who will bring some tremendous experience with us. It is about the right equipment, how to use it, and the right people. And we'll go into that today, and we encourage you to ask as many questions as you possibly can. This is your forum. You control the content. We've certainly prepared an initial agenda, but you're going to have the opportunity to come in today, listen, ask questions. It's a safe environment. Let me just start with some housekeeping. As you are all seeing, we are on a live webcast, and this tool will allow you to see the PowerPoint and certainly any of the slides we show, but it also will allow you to answer and ask any questions. And right above me, there is a little bubble. If you click on that, it will pop up a little dialog box that will allow you to type in your question, make a comment. It's also a great place to go, ooh and ah, or I learned something great. So feel free to put anything you want in that particular box, but be kind. And we do look forward to moving forward. I'm Pete Hanley. I'm President and COO of PlanNet. We're a full-service meeting management company. We've certainly experienced enough of our ups and downs over the years with AV, and I think, if anything, everybody can leave today with a good plan of action to not only get good pricing and understand what equipment is right for you, but also perhaps understand a good backup plan to make sure that this most critical part of a meeting is something you can count on and rely on. Behind me, very appropriately today, is the Ottawa Convention Center. It's actually the brand new, it looks brand new, certainly from our picture here. It is a beautiful facility. It's actually opening today. Some of the stuff that's really neat about it, I think, for everybody to be aware of is, one, it's actually open on the site of the old Ottawa Convention Center. And Ottawa, to kind of give everybody an understanding of where Ottawa is, if you kind of go directly north from where we are and go more towards the center, the east center of Canada, you'll find this beautiful city. With regards to the design of this building, it was actually built LEED certified, silver LEED certified. So there's about 40% savings off of a traditional building just on using this facility. It actually gathers rainwater through the building, so more efficient flushes through the WC, as they say. But also all the meeting rooms have individual controls in there, so you can adjust the power, the heat, the lighting, security, etc., and control your sound within the room. So very appropriate today for this AV discussion. It also has built-in widescreens in every meeting room. So just a tremendous facility. Congratulations to the Ottawa Convention Center and Canada for opening this today. And speaking of Canada, I think for all of us as meeting professionals, we realize that we are wearing many, many hats, right? It's marketing one day, it's site selection the next, it's negotiator, and the AV component is such an integral part of our jobs. But it's a bit scary. It changes so fast. How to apply it? Is the speaker going to know how to use it? Is the AV technician going to know how to use it? Those are all key questions that we need to get answered and we need help with. And we rely on those AV people to help us make these meetings a success. There's no way we can know everything about every piece of equipment or how to apply it. So today, as we go through this, we're going to be getting some of that information. This trailblazing opportunity, by the way, is being brought to you by PlanNet and the Canadian Tourism Commission. I think it is important to realize that the CTC can be a really valuable asset and resource for you when you're looking for a destination that can attract attendees. Canada has some phenomenal destinations, and I think you should involve your Canadian Tourism Commission representative when you're looking for a destination, either by contacting them directly or certainly asking your site selection company to make sure they're involved in that lead distribution so that they can get you the things you need to make the right decision on a destination. Let's watch a unique Canadian experience now and keep exploring.
Behind us! Oh, come to... Oh, come to... Oh, no! No! No, no!
welcome back. Now let's introduce our guest. Today I have with me Tim Brady. He is COO and Executive Vice President of Swank. I think you will find him to be a great resource, but one of the main reasons I invited Tim to be part of this webisode was because he is somebody that I've been able to trust. I know he says it like it is, and it's somebody I can count on when I'm talking AV. And I think for all of us, actually one of the things I wanted to bring up, and I'll go into that in a moment, but Tim is married, no kids, which definitely allows him enough time to get out and golf, to do his fishing. And from what I hear, although I haven't necessarily heard it yet, he is an incredible musician. So hopefully maybe he'll pull out something here and we can hear him play towards the end. So Tim, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's get into this, Tim, and start talking AV. One of the things that somebody said to me, and I kind of have it quoted here so that we can kind of start this dialogue, because I think it says there is a dynamic between the experience somebody has with AV and in the contracting and the experience they have once they start going on site and making it happen. And the quote was, I feel like as if AV companies are worse than the government. Very appropriate in today's world. They have trouble justifying their positions except to say that's the way we do things. How can we change this perception, and why is it important for us not to have that feeling?
Oh, well, first off, Peter, thanks for having me today. It's really a great opportunity to get a chance to have an open dialogue with meeting planners where we're not in an agenda-driven session here where we're working on a proposal or working on an event. It's very unusual for us to get that opportunity. So first off, on behalf of Swank and myself, we really appreciate it. You know, the government comment is interesting. I think I hear that occasionally, or I hear the comparison to a used car occasionally. And I think that it has a lot to do with the buy process. And there's such a confusion regarding technology and a fear factor. You know, there's two things that we work with. We work with people and technology, and both have a habit of failing you at the wrong moment. Right. So when you're in a negotiation phase and you're trying to make sure you drive the best value for it, there's a sense of unknown there. It's true. A lot of people will say that they feel like working with an AV company may be like working with the government. However, post-event, when the event's successful, when we've helped deliver a strong message for your attendees, I often find the feeling is just the opposite. You find a lot of meeting planners that will talk about the specific audiovisual professional they deal with very passionately, of how they've built a special relationship. Even in your intro, you mentioned the word trust, which I appreciate a great deal. So I think a lot of it has to do with building a relationship with the AV people that you deal with, and allowing enough time for discussion of your goals and objectives to make sure that we're aligning the right solutions with it.
Well, that's really hard. I mean, I think for most of us in selecting a company, one, how do I know which equipment that I need, right? So there is this balance of this unknown, and how am I going to know that you're recommending the right piece of equipment versus the most expensive or most profitable piece of equipment for you? You know, one of the questions that comes up all the time as we talk about the selection of a company is the pros and cons of that in-house company, or should I go out and get an AV company out there?
Sure.
Do you mind going into a little bit of the ins and outs of why would I choose an in-house, and when would I choose an external company?
You know, well, personally, I think, of course, we're primarily an in-house provider. There's no secret about that. But I would tell any meeting planner, it's really about choosing the best audiovisual company that suits and fits your needs. And in our world, we see people that are primarily what we will call, for lack of a better phrase, in-house buyers. They see a lot of value in the in-house proposition of the team working in sync with the hotel. And we see some buyers that are more outside buyers traditionally. But I would encourage, regardless of what type of buyer you are, that you take a hard look at the companies that you're looking at and judge what's best for you by ascertaining what's important to you, and by listening to what the companies that you're getting proposals from are saying to you. You know, and I would start with that for me it starts with making sure that you have an audiovisual company and professional that truly is interested in your meeting and has your objectives at heart. When you're talking to the audiovisual professional that talks to you about your meeting objectives, that wants to understand what your meeting is about, what is the cross-section of people that will be in the audience. I think those are key questions.
I'm in a rush. I'm a meeting planner. I got to get this stuff done. How do I know what questions to ask? How do I pull that out? That's not an easy thing for me to determine because I don't know the equipment, and I may not know you, right? Especially if you're the in-house. I just booked your hotel. I'm just showing up, and now I got to. How do I pull that out? How do I figure out if you're the right AV company and whether you have the right people?
Well, it starts with making sure that the AV professional asks you these questions. These are questions that an AV professional should be asking you in the sales process before you get to equipment. I think the tendency is to always rush to the equipment.
Right.
And ours is really very much a people business. It's really more about the people. I mean, the most cost-effective solution for anybody is to find somebody that, quote, rents equipment, back up a truck, load it up, and put it in the meeting room. There's really good reasons, of course, why nobody does that.
Right.
So I think it starts with the people first. And you know, we did some survey and forum work through NPI with meeting planners, and we put up a list of all the elements that they needed in an AV provider and what they looked for. And we had things such as price, equipment, and technical knowledge. And unanimously, the answer was the number one thing they were looking for was relationship, which comes back to the trust issue. So I think investing a little time with that AV provider and having some dialogue about this is my group, these are my objectives, here's what I want to achieve.
Yeah, I got to imagine most of our viewers are not starting with that approach, because that's not the approach I would have normally started with either, especially as I entered my career or as I started doing meetings. I mean, are you saying ask for somebody's resume? Or, I mean, how do I do that? How do I qualify the person? What kind of questions should I ask during that bid process to understand?
Well, I think some great questions to ask for the AV professional, regardless whether in-house or outside, is tell me about the team that's going to be servicing my meeting. Who am I going to be working with on site? What is their background? How long have they been with your company? Are the technicians in the meeting room team members that are employed by you, or are you using outside contractors? Are the team members in my room part-time or full-time? Who's going to be my chief contact on show site, leading up my operation? What is their background? And I think a resume or a quick background on it is completely appropriate to ask for, and a good audiovisual professional is going to be able to provide that for you. Because in the end run, you know, the equipment, we use the comparison sometimes, the equipment are tools for us. They're paintbrushes. So it's how we apply them that has a great application. I'm sure you've been to events where you've seen front and rear truss with 40, 50, 100 lights on it, and the impact was, and been to one where there's very few lights and the impact had a certain wow factor in it. So it is very much about the people, and I think meeting planners, and quite frankly even AV professionals, sometimes get very hung up on the equipment end, when in reality it has a lot to do with the people that are going to be engaged in your meeting.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times when I've seen the proposal process and been involved with it, I think it just as much it's the responsibility of the AV person to get me out of the equipment conversation and focus on the skill. Because I usually pull them into the equipment and you pull them into the equipment, and if we're all talking equipment, we're never going to get to that most important part. But going back to the kind of the pros and cons of an in-house, I mean, certainly I've heard comments about why they like working with us, for instance, on meeting planning, because they get consistency. Every city, no matter where they're going in the world, they've got the same people working on their program. From an external standpoint, I would think that would be a huge value to me, working with an external company. Why? Can you give me some pros and cons on that kind of discussion?
Sure. You know, well, I think the benefits of an in-house, of course, are first off, they're in sync with the hotel operations team. So you have a much more fluid approach to your meeting. They're an integral cog in those gears, if you will, of what's taking place to get your event put on. So it's much more natural and easier for a hotel to facilitate your meeting. Additionally, they usually have a much better knowledge of the space. They typically have a much better idea of what sound, lighting, and video is appropriate for that meeting space, and have a lot more flexibility. Of course, they have equipment available on site, as far as backup equipment, with a full storage facility available on site. And their technicians, as a general rule, the people on site are much more trained in hospitality and a service approach. You know, in our organization, as an example, we send people to training the first week in our company, and they spend a week in training. And for 3 days, they don't talk about audiovisual. They talk about hotels and the hospitality environment. So I think you'll find the in-house technicians are much more reflective of that hospitality environment and are much more in tune with the hotel and the needs. Now, from the outside, an outside company, of course, and our company does both, of course, so I don't want to speak out of both sides of my mouth here, but an event services company, you do have the ability to have, if you're doing a lot of shows, the same technicians or crew that can build a comfort level with. You have the ability of them being dedicated to just your meeting room, which is sometimes an advantage. And I think there's a perception that the outside providers are sometimes more creative or have a better technical expertise. Now, I would refute that with many of our in-house teams that can show you examples. But there's really two stereotypes on the extreme if you talk to a lot of meeting planners or producers. The outside companies are more creative, they have more technical expertise, and they're better priced. However, They're also not as hospitality-minded, perhaps. They're not as comfortable speaking to our speakers, and they don't integrate with a hotel as well.
Yeah,
then the in-house side has the other. But they're really both stereotypes in many ways. I think you can find outside companies that are very hospitality-oriented and in-house companies that are terribly creative and as technically expert as anybody. Anywhere else you could go.
Well, it was interesting because one of the questions that comes up a lot on our side, I'm seeing actually a question must have just come in. Dee, do you mind sharing a question, one of the questions that's come in?
Sure. We actually have a combination of two questions. One person asking generically, prices vary from building to building for the same equipment from the same AV company, often in the same city, and why? And then someone asking specifically, Swank is the in-house AV provider at most of the hotels that I use for meetings and conferences. Can a planner enter into a contract with Swank that ensures that pricing is consistent regardless of the hotel you're using during a specific period of time?
Sure. Look, two questions there. As far as equipment being priced differently from buildings, I don't know how accurate that really is, because what happens is the projector we may use in Hotel A may be very different from the projector needed in Hotel B.
That makes sense.
You know, there is
But
certain.
is New York more expensive than some other city that's more, I mean, is that same piece of equipment going to cost me more, do you think, in a big city?
And a lot of times, yes, it does,
Okay.
because the other factors cost more. I mean, New York City is a great example. What doesn't cost you more in New York
Right,
City?
exactly.
Whether it's the coffee, the food, the beverage, so AV is no different. Our cost factors and
Hey, I'm
factors
a
and
New Yorker,
operations.
don't
right.
pick on it.
Yeah. But it's worth it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
It is.
that's certainly part of it. But, you know, building to building in hotels, I'll often find when clients tell me that when I dig, I discover other factors that it's really not quite the same equipment in it. As far as entering an agreement with Swank, absolutely. We'd love to talk to you about that and be able to do that. And we have some of those agreements with companies on a national basis for when they travel to our hotels.
Let me ask you a question. You earlier talked about equipment and what's on site, right? An in-house company is going to have the equipment there. But obviously they're going to be limited on equipment as well. Do they have two of everything? And or do they have a place off-site that they're pulling the equipment in from? Like, because that would be a concern for me, right? they've only got a limited amount of equipment. Something goes wrong, what do I do?
Right. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. Our model as a company is to place 90 to 97% of the equipment needed on site in the hotel. Even in our larger properties, the sound systems, the large line array or three-way PA systems, the intelligent lighting, the LED lighting, the video conferencing, the high-end equipment is on site as much as possible. Because our model is built on if you're an audiovisual director, how your day is determined is pretty much determined by 9 o'clock in the morning, right? You've got a lot of meetings to kick off, and the hotel and the clients expect things to be flawless. So it's natural that our on-site team is most comfortable with the equipment they have on site. So where a lot of our competitors or other companies may use a hub and spoke model, if you will, we'll put the basics of the equipment on site and keep all of the higher-end stuff in a warehouse. Ours is just the opposite. It's built around keeping that equipment on site so that it's tailored to the facility, so that our team members have a great comfort level and know how to operate it, and so that yes, we have the backup and necessary resources. Now, that being said, obviously, can I keep 200 foot of truss and 30 chain motors on site at a hotel? No. So most of our larger cities have showrooms where the larger or the bulky equipment, if you will, is kept.
So that is a question as a planner I should be asking is where is that equipment, how accessible is it, whether it's a resort or a downtown hotel. I should be asking that in my bid process, if you will, finding the right AV company. Would you agree?
I think it's a great question to ask, where's the equipment coming from? The sound system and video and the lighting systems that you've prepared in my proposal, is this equipment on site in your hotel and are your team members comfortable? Is it coming from some central warehouse, or is this something you're having to, quote, re-rent or get from another provider? Those are great questions to ask.
Fantastic. Talking about players for a minute, one of the things that I think terminology in our industry is so difficult, right? AV company, what is that? Green, what is that, right? I mean, all these terms have become so generic and so general. Sure. One of the things that I hear a lot is AV person, producer, staging company. Can you help me understand and help our audience understand what's the difference between all those? Maybe a definition of those or how you would define those?
Sure. Well, let's start with staging company, because I think that was one that causes confusion. I think for most folks, staging company refers to a company that specializes in events, markets direct to the end user, and is typically not in-house. Okay. In other words, they're a company outside of it. Or you'll hear the phrase in-house company, which is a company that typically is in-house on site. Those are two differentiators you hear a lot, staging versus in-house company.
Okay.
You know, for our company, the trick, I think, is we try to make sure our staging division looks more like in-house with a hospitality approach, and then our in-house has many of the factors that you value in a staging company. You know, a producer is such a broad term for a lot of people. I think for most people, a producer is somebody who is much more engaged in your content of what you want to deliver and the overall look and feel of the meeting. And they may also be in charge of, and often are in charge of, the audiovisual or technology in the meeting room. Typically, of course, they're involved on much larger scale productions. There's a larger scale production or a rollout that's technically complex, and a producer is brought in to make sure an interface, what we want our message to be, and delivering the content of that along with the technology provided to deliver it.
At what point do you feel I need a producer? How do I determine, you know, my meeting's growing, you know, maybe I'm a corporate planner and I'm going from, my meeting was 100 people one year, it's now 300, and now we're up at 700. How do I determine when do I need to go just from that in-house AV person to the staging aspect, and then when do I decide I'm staging up to producing? Or is that the right way to ask the question?
Yeah, I suppose it is. You know, I think there's a lot of in-house companies, and we specialize in being an in-house production resource. I think for my recommendation would be when your content has to be developed even more, and you find yourself reaching outside to develop the content, and then the delivery of that content becomes questionable for you. I'm not sure how I want to deliver this, and you can't get the right answers from your AV provider in that, then perhaps that's something that you should pursue.
Is that something from a standpoint of the bid process? When are you guys brought in, or when is the AV person brought into the process? Do I hire the producer first and let them hire the AV company? Do I hire the AV company and have them go, well, you know what, staging's a little above me and producing's a whole nother level? Where should I go as a meeting professional to in that process?
Well, obviously for us, I would recommend that you talk to the audiovisual professional first,
Right.
Of course, right?
Right.
But I think that's a comfort level for either factor. We have a lot of producers who are clients that we work with a great deal. We have clients come to us quite a bit that say, listen, I need help on the creative side, whether it's set and scenic or content. And there's many times we can help them up to a strong level and produce things for them, whether it's produce a video, help them with the look and feel of the stage, what have you. Then there's times where clients may say, listen, I need scripts written, I need very specific objectives. And a good provider will be very careful to say, okay, we're reaching a point now where we're not comfortable in delivering that, and that service is not really our niche or our forte. And they'll recommend and bring the producers in for you. But really, I think either one's appropriate. To me, it has a lot to do with your own personal comfort level. You know, maybe as a company, you have a marketing department and you're very comfortable with the delivery of your content and how you want it done. So going direct to an AV provider makes sense to you.
In talking about the people, though, and again, going back to that, and how important those people are, do all the in-house companies are they badged employee paycheck from the AV company that's in-house, or are they usually contractors that are outside coming in and doing the work anyway, even though they're technically in-house?
Yes, typically in our model, the overwhelming majority of our people are our own team members on site. We build a model that says our people are on site, they're dedicated to the hotel, and then our additional resources are also team members of pools of technicians, if you will, when we have overflow in it. And we particularly work not to utilize as much freelance or outside labor. However, there are many times that's called for, especially, if you will, somebody needs a very special high-end camera operator, or a producer is a great example where you might look at freelance or outside providers. So we use that when appropriate. It's a great question for a meeting planner to ask. Again, we always get hung on the equipment, right? But tell me about your labor force and the mix of it. How many are your team members? How many of outside, and
So
who
I
are
should
they?
ask that, feel comfortable asking that as a planner during
Absolutely.
the bid process.
I would. I'd want to know that.
I know we have a question from the audience. Can we have that question real quick, Dee?
Okay. If I choose to go with an outside AV vendor at a hotel that has an in-house AV company, how should the in-house company and the outside vendor work together?
Well, ideally seamlessly.
Yeah.
That's a great question. And we get that a lot. You know, ours is an interesting position. As an in-house company, when you walk through the door of that hotel, you're a guest. And our job is to service you, and that's our approach. But it's intriguing because oftentimes we are battling with another company in the RFP process, And sometimes, not many hopefully, but sometimes we lose and the client chooses another provider. So the same people that we've drawn swords with to compete with now come through the door as a client and should be treated as such. So building that relationship is key. I think where meeting planners can help is to ensure that if they're using an outside company, that there is a good dialogue with the in-house team on site and there is a working relationship built. Because at the end of the day, we represent the hotel and we want you to leave with a positive experience, even if you did choose an outside company.
Yeah, but I got to imagine at some level there is that bitterness, right? I didn't win, got this other guy coming in, I'm going to make this as difficult as possible, right? They're never coming back to this hotel. It's a wedding, right? It's only going to happen once or maybe twice. But the reality is I've got to imagine, how do I build that relationship? How do you start feeling I'm important even though I selected the other company?
Well, you are important as a guest of the hotel, and you don't win future. If you're not going to be somebody's first choice, you certainly want to be their second. You know, there's the old saying, you don't catch a lot of flies with vinegar. Right. So, you know, the theory of, gee, you're bringing an outside company in, so I'm going to treat you bad and charge you higher prices and make sure you're punished for it, it's probably not going to help me win your business. So we work to educate and teach our team members to do just the opposite. We want to be there to help you out, to make sure you know what we're doing to help, and be an asset to you in it. We often run into situations all the time where the outside provider didn't bring a piece of equipment, needs a backup piece of gear, there was an addition to it, and those are wonderful opportunities to us, handled correctly, to help hopefully forge a relationship with you.
Even though I don't choose you, though, can I go out and ask you for some type of pricing, or is it likely that I should position that before we even get there, before we need it? Because obviously that's the other fear I have is, okay, I hired the outside guy. Now they're going to rake me over the coals when I get in there and need a piece of equipment. It's going to be, cost plus commission, paid off, back payment, whatever. How do I deal with that? How can I work with you better so that I'm not going to be spending 5 times what it costs to buy the piece of equipment when I need it, even though I didn't select you?
Yeah, well, I think if you need a piece of equipment on site and you're using an outside provider, at best you shouldn't pay any more than book price, unless, of course, you need something that's not on site and there's extenuating circumstances to get it delivered. But I think you can negotiate that with the in-house company ahead of time if you sense that's going to be a need. Right. The most common scenario for us when somebody brings an outside provider is they bring them for the main tent or the general session, and the in-house is still providing breakout and other equipment. So those negotiations usually take place. Yeah,
do you encourage, certainly if you don't win it, you'd encourage the using both companies. But the reality is it good? Should I try in my bid process to split this up? Should I give a little to the in-house and a little to kind of hedge my bet?
Well, I think providing something to the in-house has some value to the meeting planner because then they're doing something for you. Right. So it certainly helps the relationship. But I don't think you should feel forced to. Hopefully, if it's us and we're in-house, you've selected us for the whole thing, and we can provide the best value for it. But if not, I can assure you we're going to help you take care of your needs.
Tell me about the last failure you had. One of my favorite quotes, especially in this industry, is success is going from failure to failure with great enthusiasm. Right? It's an old Mark Twain quote. Mm-hmm. A great planner is not someone who's just had success over the time. They've had to stumble, otherwise you don't know what to look out for. You don't know what issues to be addressing and what kind of backup plan you should have. Can you tell me about a failure you guys have had? I know that's kind of a weird thing to do in front of an audience that might be your customers or prospects, but I'd like to kind of hear what kind of things do happen and how do you deal with it?
Well, it's a great question, and we're a company that prides itself on flawless execution. It's part of our service team, but we do deal with two things. We deal with people and we deal with electronics, and both have a habit of malfunctioning on you from time to time. If I had to point to something, rather than point to a specific, we've put a lot of focus on recordings in the last year or two. We do an internal customer survey, and we track our service errors and look to see what we can learn from them. And we know that recording is a particular painful one for an AV company to miss. If you think about it, when we provide services for you, what else do we do where we actually give you a product that you take home?
Right, that's true.
You sign it. And when you have feedback in the room or sound issues or video issues, perhaps they may fade in time, but a recording, you needed that for something. To not have that, and with the advent of hybrid meetings and other factors, getting a good recording has become critical. So we had some recording issues a year or two ago, and where we were finding them was in the more simple the setup, the more likely for issues. I always tell our guys, the larger the event is, the more complex it is, the more technically challenging it is, the less I worry about it. We have our best people. We have a tremendous amount of focus on those. It's the basic meeting room, 2 microphones, record, whether it be audio or video, that scares me. So we had some failures in that area 2 years ago. When we looked, we said this is the area where we've experienced the most. By the way, it wasn't a lot, but there were issues there. And we put together very intensive training sessions on our recording standards, and also made it a requirement of viewing a recording video that we have, taking a test on it, and ensuring that all the minimum standards are met every time we record, relative to having backup equipment on site, headphones for the person to live on playback. Really basic AV 101 that oftentimes on the simplest recording can easily be overlooked.
Do I need to think about that as the planner, or once I hired you and we decided what, am I letting that go totally to you? Is that totally your responsibility? Are you going to make sure there's a backup piece there? Are you going to be on top of that, or do I need to be on top of you about it?
Well, I think you should ask. Yes, we provide. That's one of the benefits of being in-house a lot of times, is that the backup equipment's there on site. We've always got backup projectors, mics, or whatever, and sometimes an outside company may not provide for that as well. But I think you need to ask your providers that. Tell me about your backup systems. If my projector dies, what do you have on site? If I go from 4 wireless mics to 7, what's that going to engage?
Well, the squelching and the distraction. Audiovisual has the ability to do so much for a meeting in how an attendee feels about that meeting, but it also just has an ability to destroy the meeting, right? Once I hear something, a distraction, being a type A, New Yorker, firstborn, Irish Catholic, blah, 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 once I hear that noise, I'm distracted for the rest of the meeting. I am constantly thinking about it. What else can I do as a planner to help mitigate that, to get rid of that problem?
I think one of the most, everybody talks about technology, which is very important. And most meeting planners, when they talk AV, they focus a great deal on projectors and lumens and the visual. But when you think about it, audio is the single most important component. An example in this is if the lights go dark in here and we lose everything else, as long as you can hear us, we can still have a meeting.
That's a great point.
It's the same thing in a meeting room. But the minute you can't hear, the meeting's over. However, it's commonly the area that's paid the least amount of attention to. So, I would encourage meeting planners to look specifically at their audio. If there's an area to upgrade, to consider the external sound system strongly if needed, and to make sure that that's backed up properly.
Well, I've been in so many rooms where, it's a long room, that's just the way it is, right? I had to book this space. And they have one little screen all the way up the front, or the one speaker is all the way up in the front. And, I tend to be running a little bit late for some things, so I come into the back of the room and I can't see the slides, I can't hear the sound. But I've got to imagine on the other side, the planner's going, man, I was only given this much money to spend, or maybe they don't even think about it. They maybe have never been in that meeting room or know what it's like. What can we do as planners? What questions can we ask to make sure, if I didn't know that, I'd get that information I need from you as the AV company?
Well, I think some questions that you can ask specifically, obviously you need to know your space and say, what sound systems do you commonly utilize for this meeting room? What audio setups do you recommend to ensure? I want to ensure that everybody can hear adequately in the back of the room. A word I like to use with our technicians is, I want to make sure the sound is rich, that it's full. Everybody has a habit of saying loud, of course. You don't want loud, you want it rich, you want it full, you want the voice to resonate well with the attendances.
Throughout the room.
Consistent across the room, certainly. And to make sure and look at it and challenge. You may ask, for an example, can you show me a diagram of speaker placements? If you're in a long, skinny room, which happens, or in a lot of our historical hotels, spaces that are challenging,
that's great.
You may ask them, what do you recommend to overcome this issue? In other words, I'm concerned this room is really long. How do I know that the guy in the back is going to hear as well as the guy in the front? And what systems are you utilizing to accomplish that?
Are there metrics out there that we can use? I mean, when you're talking about a reception, there are certainly numbers of how many people per bartender or how many service people per table, right? But from a standpoint of AV, are there metrics I should be able to ask for with regards to equipment, like this many people, this many screens, this many people, this many mics? Is that a right good way to look at it?
It's tough to do because you have the number of attendees, and then you have the physical space to consider. And then you have the ambient noise level of what type of event it is. If you're doing a cocktail party, here's a common mistake. It's a cocktail party, just put up something simple because we have a quick 5-minute announcement. Well, the ambient noise level at a cocktail party is much higher than you're going to find in your meeting room where everybody's paying attention to the speaker. Right. So it's hard to come up with metrics. On an individual hotel basis in most of our properties, Our people can tell you in this meeting space, here's good, better, best on sound system, here's good, better, best on projection and visuals to see in the room.
Well, it kills me even at our own industry meetings, right? I mean, we are the worst. As hospitality people, we are so not hospitable to speakers in our business. We go to dinners and receptions, and somebody gets up to speak, and everybody is still talking and not listening to what's going on. So certainly I would think you could get our attention better, having the right type of ambient noise and affected, rather, and the right number of speakers and mics, et cetera, to be able to address that. What other kind of mistakes and things do you see planners make all the time?
That's a good question. I think I'm going to go back to our opening comments. I think a key mistake is not finding a few minutes to make sure that your audiovisual technology professional understands what objectives that you want to achieve with your meetings. You know, because you're going to look to, in our meeting planner survey, we heard from meeting planners saying, we don't know what we don't know. You need to tell us the enhancements and the things that can make our meeting better. And we have a lot of those. But a good provider, once they understand your key objectives, can help you determine what those enhancements would be. They're going to have the best impact for you. Maybe decorative lighting in the room would work in your example of a reception party, and you're trying to create an atmosphere, reward people. Maybe that's the opposite approach you need for the message that you want to deliver. So I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that gets made, is it becomes, because yes, we're all in a hurry, so it becomes, here's my RFP, respond to it. You know, I think a great exercise as an example that meeting planners can do is when you send out an RFP to a provider, say, listen, here's the basic equipment I want you to propose on. Separately, here's my goals and objectives I want to achieve for the meeting. Tell me the enhancements and the value adds that you would recommend to help me deliver my message. Then when you're evaluating your provider, you can look at price and value, which is important on your basic equipment, the stuff you need. But you can also look at your enhancement and value adds. And from those, I think you can determine quite quickly who's really interested in helping you deliver your message.
I want to dig into that a little more. I know Dee has a few more questions. I know she's over there managing all the questions as they're coming in. So Dee, do you want to pick another one and throw it at us?
Sure. We once again have two people asking similar versions of the same question. What disaster recovery suggestions do you have? We have a lady who just wrote in that how do you determine if a hotel wireless network is sufficient for your needs? They just experienced a major internet failure in the middle of their event.
Mm-hmm.
Disaster recovery, what do you suggest?
Well, backups, backups, backups.
Right.
And really the right team members. You know, I make this comparison with folks all the time when I talk to our new hires. Flawless execution is in our service team. And I say, is that realistic? Can we really be flawless?
Right.
And they go, well, I don't know. And I say, well, how many of you got a flight out of here tomorrow? And they'll raise their hand. Do you expect your pilot to be flawless? Yes. But what's more flawless than Captain Sully landing that plane on the water? So,
speaking of New York.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of New York, I mean, we would all, Captain Sully's the one person I know the name of who had an incident in an airplane. Yet if I see him fly my plane tonight, I'm going to feel pretty good about it.
Well, it is all in the recovery, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way we can all be flawless. There's just too many details and too much for all of us to manage. And, you know, AV, there's just too much equipment. Going back for a sec, though, one of the things we had talked about before was the value adds. Can you talk a little bit more? Because I think most people feel that to take it to the next level, it's just going to wipe out my budget. I know you brought a couple slides with us today that maybe we can kind of go into if you want to show some of those to point out. But I'd really like to kind of make sure the audience can walk away with a feeling that, you know what, it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg and might take my entire budget to really improve the experience, the visual, the audio, and everything else for the meeting.
Right. A few value. By the way, I wanted to answer because it sounded like that question had to do with wireless internet in the meeting room, and that they had a failure on that. And in some hotels, the in-house AV company, we take care of the internet in the meeting room, and in some it's handled by another provider. But I think a key to that is really understanding what bandwidth that you're expecting to use. And I think a good rule of thumb is that whatever bandwidth that you look to purchase, your need should be at 65% of that. We commonly find in some recent surveys that we've done that guest complaints or issues with internet increase when you start using more than 70% of the bandwidth that's required in the room. So that 30 to 35% cushion on the bandwidth that you purchase is very important, especially for the high-end users.
Do you have any suggestion on what questions I can ask or who I should go to as the planner? Is it somebody go to my organization? Do I do it as a survey to my attendees? What kind of things do I need to find out to know what bandwidth? Because I have no clue what to ask you, right? I mean, if I'm a typical meeting professional.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I think you can work with your IT department to determine how much the individual users is, because there's the individual bandwidth, which I think in most cases for hotels have a robust system for the individual requirements, unless, of course, everybody's coming that works at Apple.
Right.
They're not going to be downloading all the heavy stuff, right?
Exactly.
So if your people have unique needs, you need to be able to define that. And then specifically the internet that you may be using in the presentation format, which often can be high-end, such as if you're doing a video conference or a web conference or tying onto a website where you're going to show video or streaming video and so forth. Those are things you need to make sure and tell the provider.
Well, and it's interesting because I think, again, going back to how many hats a meeting professional has to wear, this AV one and certainly the IT side of it, we put the hat on quickly, and we are the first ones that will be blamed if it doesn't work on site. But we've got to really use the resources we have in our organizations better to make them realize that that's not something necessarily we can measure, and it's only going to increase. I mean, obviously with the pad, the tablet market, with iPad doing so well, BlackBerry comes out with its playbook in a couple days. I mean, everybody's going to have tablets, and it's amazing how fast that market has been growing. So for you guys to be able to help us with bandwidth, I think is critical. Understanding it, what questions we need to ask, and I would encourage you, and certainly all the AV companies that are watching, to make sure you're giving me the questions that I need to go back to at my organization so that I come with the right data. Because, man, I don't want my people hitting a stopgap, either, obviously, worst case where the internet goes down. That's bad enough. But if it slows down everything. The questions I'm getting, the interaction between us and the audience, the speakers and the audience, I think that's critical. Let me ask you this, from a trends perspective. You mentioned hybrid earlier. Why hybrid? What is, going back to all these terms of green and AV and whatever else, hybrid is one of those terms I think most people don't understand yet.
Yes.
Why hybrid?
I think the big message on hybrid is it provides the meeting planner the opportunity to extend their message to other people who weren't there, which is one factor. But more importantly, I think it's about message retention. And that's where I see a great use for it. We're embarking on a program with a provider. In fact, I think you're using Sonic Media Site as an example for this presentation, which gives you the different look. So that attendees at the meeting can view the meeting materials afterwards. How many times have you seen a speaker or a presentation and thought, boy, that was really impactful. Man, I wished I could see that again. So, typically retention, you have a dynamite speaker who presents great information, your message is delivered well. And if you're lucky, the retention of that's maybe 3 to 5 days for the attendee, right?
Yeah.
They go to the cocktail party, they fly home, what have you. What a great tool to be able to send to attendees and say, listen, you can see the president's keynote speech again. Here it is where you can tap into it and see it.
Well, that was actually one of the reasons in developing the Breakout Room was this concept that, yes, people could come if they're available to watch the live session. If they don't have 45 minutes to an hour to sit and watch the whole thing, they can come back and watch pieces of it. And certainly if they miss the date, they can come in and watch a recorded version, because anybody can come back and watch this one. I think for a live meeting, the complement of that and to be able to, whether you're going to charge for it or you're going to be able to give it to those who just couldn't go to those concurrent sessions all at once, right? Because there are many times that the really two great sessions that I would have wanted to go to are unfortunately at the same exact time. How are you seeing it being used best? What is your recommendation with the hybrid side of meetings?
Well, what I see best is formats similar to what you're using here, where you have the graphics that are being utilized on one screen and the presenters on another. When it's web-based and people can click and access it easily, both during the meeting and afterwards, and making sure that it's an interactive format. The technology is becoming so much more about the attendee than the presenter. So as an example, in the format that you're using the day afterwards and that we utilize, the attendee after the event can go wherever they want in the speech. They can reference it by slide. They can reference it by word. They can type in a specific phrase, such as government AV, if you like, and they can go to that section of the presentation. When people are watching things on their computer or laptop, it's highly interactive and they want control. If you simply place a 2-hour video on the web, then I don't know that you'll get much action because people aren't going to sit for 2 hours.
Correct.
But when you put it in a format where they can click and move it according to the graphics being used or advance in it and easily access whatever piece of information they want, that's where I think you drive the most value.
Yeah, and we only have 2 hours left of this session, so I
Yeah.
think that would be, no, I definitely agree with you. It's so true. And on that same note, though, from a hybrid standpoint, I think some people their trepidation is that they're going to lose money. People are not going to come to their live meeting if they put all the content out there. What are you seeing? What do you think? What are your feelings on
Well,
that?
I think that the savvy meeting planners, I talked to one association who for 3 years have done this, and they've actually increased their attendance because they don't post the whole meeting.
Right.
They post a specific speaker or section of it, or they take specific highlights and post afterwards. And then in the following year of their meeting, they say for highlights from last year, go here and you can see specific information on it. So I think the opposite is true. I think it can drive attendees. I don't believe anything replaces face-to-face meetings. You and I didn't have to fly here to do this. You could have phoned me in and dialed it in, and I was on one screen and you're on another, but you don't get the same level of interaction.
Absolutely.
I know our viewers are
both
believing
be in
that.
Ottawa on the same day and
Yeah.
the opening. I mean, how amazing is that, right?
So I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot to be said for the hybrid being able to help drive face-to-face meetings, and also to ensure that when the face-to-face meetings happen, that you get better retention from your attendees.
Interesting. What about integrating it in social media channels? Are you seeing any of that yet? Is that taking off? Are you seeing a return on investment there?
We're seeing some with people. You know, popular thing that we hear about is Twitter feeds. Can you do a Twitter feed for our meeting?
Right.
But then I'll often ask groups of people, how many of your people actively use Twitter? And it's usually a very small group. People are intrigued by Twitter, but there, quite frankly, there's a lot of people that don't use it. So I think a great example is to make technology and social networking easy. So a thing that we've proposed a lot and we're doing more and more of is simply providing somewhere that your attendees can text a question to the presenter. Very simple technology. They text to a number that feeds to a moderator who can then post the questions on the screen. And what we found is if you want something truly interactive, the amount of questions are just enormous that you'll get. An example, we did it at our own national leadership meeting, and we had 75 attendees, and over a 3-day period, we received over 180 questions.
Wow.
Now, I could put microphones all across that room, and you could do this, and we've seen meeting planners do this for years, right? Can we put a microphone on every table? Can we set up overhead mics so anybody can be heard? But the fact of the matter is, most people are very uncomfortable standing up and talking in a mic. And while a lot of people are interested in Twitter, they all know how to text whether they like it or not, right? I talked to a lot of baby boomers who text, and I say, why did you get into texting? Well, it's the only way my kids would communicate with me.
Yeah,
so
true.
Everybody knows how to text. So simply setting up a simple system to introduce them to them to make it interesting. Listen, text your questions here. We can put them on the screen for the speaker. I found provides a really dynamic meeting for people. And makes people much more comfortable. I view it kind of as a first step, if you will, that helps break the barrier down.
Well, I think your audience participation comments are key. I think we've got to get the audience engaged. It isn't about necessarily speakers just saying everything. It's about, like this, right? Taking in questions and being able to address those things that are of concern at that moment, because information's changing so fast, and obviously we need to be able to distribute that information as quickly as possible and really share and learn from each other's ideas. The ability to source those questions right in a live audience in a safe environment is phenomenal. Let's take a moment and watch another video of a Canada experience, and I think we should just keep exploring because from a standpoint of the AV aspects today, and certainly for where we're picking our destinations, I think everybody should take a moment and again keep exploring.
Whoa! They just love us.
Welcome back, everyone. I think before we close, I do want to again congratulate the Ottawa Convention Center for its grand opening today. I certainly want to thank Tim for joining us today and going through so many topics and so much information in such a short period of time. I can see by the number of questions that have come in that this, certainly was a hot topic, and it is something that most meeting professionals really want to learn more about and need to know more about. So I think those partnering aspects are key. We're going to continue the discussion, by the way, on facebook.com/Canada meetings. So if you want to log on to that when we're done and keep asking questions and start a dialogue, I would encourage you to do that. I do want to also encourage you to tell your friends and coworkers that this is a recorded session. You'll be able to come back on. Just go to yourmeeting.com and click on the breakout room, and you can watch any of these sessions that are recorded, obviously live, but then come back afterwards and see it later and see bits and pieces or just refresh your memory. You could also email us at PlanNetEducationSeries@yourmeeting.com if you want to learn more about the education series, or you want to learn more about Tim, Swank, or certainly the CTC if you need to find your CTC rep if you don't know them already. Today was a phenomenal topic. I really appreciate everybody joining us. I think it's really important that when it matters, we discuss it in the breakout room. Thank you.